place. So, for example, for those of us who live in London, in Hackney, for example, people say that they're from Dalston or Stamford Hill or Stoke Newington or Shoreditch. They don't say they're from Hackney, which is a very big area, and it's true for the whole country. So we try to combine the concept of the parish with the idea of the commune, that there should be, in the new democratic Britain that is coming, there should be self-governing local organisations, and we call that the parish commune system, and we're trying to pioneer that as a form of local assemblies, and that's directly inspired by Ocalan and what's going on in Rojava, which we saw last April. Then two more areas that are extremely important to the very distinctive feature of genealogy or women's leadership, which is such an extraordinary phenomenon of what's going on in Rojava, both militarily and within the civic structures, where 40% of the assembly has to be women and always a woman co-chair and a male co-chair. This is of extreme importance, and that's linked also to the subject we're going to be talking about today, which is the concept from Murray Bookchin, really, of the ecology and the self-governing ecology and the relationship with nature. And then we thought that we couldn't really do this without also looking at the political reality. So the political reality in Turkey, where there is, let's just say, extreme military violence used against Kurds, and how that's developing. I hope we look at the HDP and the way that is trying to champion some of these ideas to get people in this country to be more aware of those realities and how we proceed. So roughly, that's the agenda. The agenda for today is to be looking in detail at this concept of democratic federalism, and then to be looking, as the day goes on, at the type of feminism developed within Ocalan's thought by then, and in relation to Rojava and the threat of Turkish attack.
There are some racist, nationalist Turkish elites there, they just want to attack the Kurds. It's not that. Through this fight with the Kurds, not only in Turkey, but also in Syria and in Iraq, in all parts of Kurdistan, they are trying to rebuild a state apparatus. And this strong anti-Kurdish feeling, this anti-Kurdish sentiment, seems to be the only remaining ideological component that unites these people. So, having said that, I mean, the picture is quite grim, I should say now. There is no way out, it seems, out of this, very, on the one hand, with a lot of state repression on not only the Kurds, but the democratic society in general in Turkey. And we have been able to somehow resist to death. I mean, despite all these pressures, I should say, still there is hope. In the recent elections, we got close to 12%. Despite all this repression, actually, we increased both the number of our votes and the number of our seats. That was an interesting thing. I mean, despite all this repression, there is still spaces of both resistance and hope. So there is an ongoing struggle. Within prisons, outside prisons, what Leila is doing now, members of parliament or ordinary people, my simple argument is that, I mean, they can be very repressive, they can be too violent and using every means of repression at the disposal of the state to repress the society, but society works in strange ways. Culture is very resilient, so somehow we find ways to survive. When they ask us, really, oftentimes foreigners, ambassadors mostly, say, how do you survive? And my simple answer to that question is, this is not just new. I mean, over the last century, 100 years, we have been exposed to all kinds of violence, policies of cultural assimilation, genocidal practices. So each time, we somehow excelled our skills for survival. I mean, one thing we are good at, we know how to survive. In prison, in the mountains, in exile, doesn't matter, but we have quite good survival skills. And hopefully we are going to survive this this wave of repression too. In the Middle East is a very crucial one. And finally, of course, ecology, but I would like to use the word, kind of the word, how do human beings relate to nature? It's some fundamental question, right? So then we have identity, class, gender, and human nature relationship. So in that sense, I would say Mr. Abdullah Ocalan's ideas are, the arguments that he put forth are actually helping us to go beyond the theoretical limits of existing revolutionary imaginaries as well as praxis. So within the HDP, what we did, let me just briefly summarize and finish here. So in northern Kurdistan, we have not been able to actually implement the kind of notion of democratic confederalism the way it was implemented in most parts of Rojava, for example, because they had the opportunity to do that, right? Having some territorial control, being able to, so the collapse of the state in Rojava enabled them to actually experiment with these ideas. In northern Kurdistan we tried, but all of our mayors are in prison, all the municipalities are gone, so many people are in prison, so we haven't been able to do that.
Where inclusiveness, secularism, pluralism can have a meaning, we could have one Allah in Iraq and southern part of Kurdistan. Therefore, Mr. Ocalan's Democratic Confederation could work as an exceptional solution model. Together, we can take steps from centralized, very limited identity to more decentralized, self-administrated entities which can combine the principle of self-rule and shared rule. So the project of democratic confederalism is not an easy task, but it's not an impossible mission either, as the majority of people across the region support peace, togetherness, and sisterhood. This mega project of peace and of self-administrated confederacies can start with a peace process that lets people build mutual interest, a spirit of cooperation, and a vision of common future. After many years of struggle, I dare to claim that the majority of people in the region would voluntarily involve in this mega process as its primary a peace process based on mutual interests and a better future for all of us. Today, looking at the world's map, we can see that many great nations are enjoying having a federation or federal system, a system which have proven capacities to bring people together, not separating them, as in the case of national statehood, especially the authoritarian ethno-traditional models. The strength of Mr. Ocalan's theory of peace lies not in attempting to solve all of these problems at the same time, but rather in stopping hostilities, hatred, enmity, and disbelief between the region's people as the first step. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Ocalan has been in prison for the last 20 years, solely for his firm and determined call to stop human rights abuses, killing, arbitrary persecution, intimidation, and systematic oppression. Mr. Ocalan is not just an intellectual asset, but also a great source of positive thinking. He reminds us to think as fellow human beings and encourages individuals and communities everywhere to understand each other and cooperate for a better future. Mr. Ocalan has been under solitary confinement and torture. Mr. Ocalan must be with his people. He can contribute greatly to the cause of peace and democracy in Turkey and Kurdistan, but only as a free man. I call upon this conference to ask the democratically elected official of the United Kingdom, European Union, and the United States to take their share of responsibility. France and the UK are signatories of the Sykes-Picot Agreement, treaty, and many EU members are signatories of Lausanne Treaty, which totally deprive the national and democratic rights of the Kurdish people. The countries that created this crisis a century ago must now mediate between Turkey and the PKK and to be a part of a sustainable solution. It's now time to call for the freedom of Mr. Ocalan and to talk about the models of a new future in the Middle East proposed by the Kurdish movement, including democratic confederalism. Thank you very much.
Power from Iran, Iraq, Turkey, and Syria. The solution, according to Ocalan, is to have a democratic state redefined which respects all the cultures and ethnic groups and does not use the law and legislation to impress on people and when expressing their identity. Ultimately, this allows the Kurdish people, Baluch, Lur, Azeri, Persian, and all the other cultures to come together under one democratic and unified nation which is not based on state structure or is not defined by a flag. One of the reasons little has changed in the Middle East is the lack of global support for credible opposition to many dictatorial things in their back from the Iraq to go back to Iran because of the sanction and they don't have a food and they don't have other jobs. But they actually, I was so embarrassed to say to Saudi that they carry out 80 kilo because I said, no, that is too much. I said 6. So what is possible solution? Democratic confederalism, separate from current form of government structure in the Middle East. It starts by recognizing difference, not from denial of difference. And this is extremely important. However, this is not the only difference in democratic confederalism. It is also the idea that any territory with people in it has deep root diversity. We have to recognize this and any harboring any political opinion, asking any question about the war in Syria, war in Yemen, the list can go on. However, the Kurdish people face additional oppression and the law are often designed to force this ethnic group into margins. For example, they are forced.
ديمقراطيك وإلو أم نقاش تكن يعني جبوكو أم بكر من دها وطاي ويان جوهري وفهم بكن بيوستكو سيستم الدستار دولة نتاو يكو هاتنا أباكرن شاو خورا كريزة كتفور آنينة وألترناتيفي وإيرو بريز أوجالان لبيش خستية إيرو وطاي ويزيدة تردد كبابني دولة نتاوين كل سر يك ناصنامة ملي يكون بيش كتنا يك نتاو يك أول يك جنس بفيشي وزير بيش كتنا بنجاهي خدا كريزي قال لك كور آنينة روجلات نادين دائرو شوازي و برنج هري جران لبيش كتيو كريزي هري كورجي بخورا در خستيو نمونه دولة تركيا، دولة سوريا، دولة العراق، دولة إيران وهر وها حمو دولة كود روجلات نادين دهاتنا آفاكرن خب سيستم كرنا خناوند كرنا وإيروجي لسر مروباهية بونه باركي جل جران روج بروج قتل عام جينوسايد در حق الجواكن دا بيكتين سوري از دخوازم هناك لسر راوستم كو تشاور بو سدمي كريز و إيرو ألترناتيفي كو تقدر بيش كذا بريبرتيا فكرين وجران ده چرچگان نتاو دموکراتیک دا سیستما کو پیش کتیه سوری 6 سال آلیه تک پارتی و هاتیه بری ببرن پارتیه بس و آلیه تک مربط و هاتیه بری ببرن و حیاب نهاجی سر دستلاتی جواک تو تاک و دهندر سوری دتونه همو یک کسایت یک قومیته او قومیته إرادة في جواكي تواهي بريفت با وحتى بمبيكليا يعني بريارة جواك تواهي بمبيكليا يك نتاو ملتي عرب هروها يتك زمان دستات دستي ميردي هروها حمو خير وبيري في ولاتي دستي مالبتا كدا هر هاتي بريفة برن وفايدة جي هاتي قرتن گشتی جواک اراده وینینه و پیکاته یک بدونجه جواک دا سوری ده هنه کرد ترکمن سوریان هر وها عربین دوری دستلات دنافان دا جیج مالبتا علویان بلا اوانا جی به مافقاتنا هیشتن ده جواک سوری ده سیاست ده میدان سیاست ده گلک رولک اساسی گرتیه ود چرچفاکو جواکه که دموکراتیک وری آفاکرن ایرو نموناوی لبرچاف د باکور روشالات سوری دار هاتیه پراتیک کرن.
As principles and turned into practice thanks to the ideas of Mr. Abdullah Ocalan.
اند وقتی که رژیم هر بخواست نافبر پیک هاته اند هر هاتیه بریده برن و هر وها ایل عراقی ده.
We see, however, that this is not.
بريز اوجالان از خازم چند نقطه میجم.
I want to say a couple of things on the situation of Mr. Abdullah Ocalan.
هات سرسمان کو دهیلی مافتا یعنی 2017 حیاب نها هین هفدیتن بیرا چینه بنا ابوقاتی وینه چونه جم ما بعد زیارت ناکه.
About the silence of the UK, for example, the silence of the international community to what is going on, the torture of Ocalan, breach of the Mandela rules, the terrible, terrible crimes, atrocities committed by Turkey in Afrin, and maybe something terrible about to happen in Rojava. Please, how do you react to the silence? And what do you think we should be doing in this country, at least to stop our own country selling arms to Turkey?
Any other?
By starting with a quote. In 2015, during the war against the Islamic State, against Daesh, I interviewed a woman called Nafia Assad in Rojava. And this is what she said. With Abdullah Ocalan, women became revolutionaries in Rojava. Otherwise, without this decades-old experience of resistance and revolution, we too would have been massacred by ISIS. We too would be sold in slave sex markets across Syria today. Wherever Abdullah Ocalan's ideas exist, women will not die. This is exactly what she said. Wherever Abdullah Ocalan's ideas exist, women will no longer die. Nafia Assad was a woman who was married against her will at the age of 14. She is today one of the many grandmothers, one of the many mothers who are at the forefront of the revolution in Rojava. So I would like to focus now a little bit more on the practice of how exactly the ideas of Abdullah Ocalan have influenced the practice, the history writing, the freedom-seeking processes of women in Kurdistan. And I would also like to stress the universal nature of Abdullah Ocalan's paradigm. It may have started with a small group of people in the mud brick village, in peace village of Ahmed, in the Turkish colonial terms Diyarbakir, where a group of students came together as revolutionaries to liberate Kurdistan from colonialism. But today, Abdullah Ocalan's ideas, Abdullah Ocalan's thought has truly reached an internationalist setting. So in the very beginning, as early as the 1970s, there were already women, such as Sakine Cansız, who were attracted to this movement, which later on would be formed as the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, of which Abdullah Ocalan is a leader. With their very small means, despite decades of assimilation and annihilation policies, these people rose up in a context in which Kurdish identity was completely annihilating and being completely destroyed. They launched war against colonialism. In an interview with a German journalist in the early 90s, Abdullah Ocalan says, "Sometimes I didn't even have money for the bus, but I declared war on colonialism." So this is the origin of this movement, which today has driven thousands, if not 10,000s, if not hundreds of thousands of women to the streets, to politics, to the mountains, and everywhere else. And I want to join now and others who owe their consciousness to Mr. Abdullah Ocalan. In this sense, of course, we need to acknowledge the resistance of Leyla Tiban, who was on the 100th day of her hunger strike. In her recent letter, she has written to women of the world saying that my consciousness as a woman my struggle for women's liberation has been triggered by the ideas of Abdullah Ocalan. So in that sense, how exactly has Abdullah Ocalan throughout these 4 decades become and established himself truly as a comrade of women? Not as somebody who simply writes and theorizes about the importance of gender equality, but actually proposes practical steps towards it. He, of course, as Laura has already mentioned, and she spoke in detail about the work of genealogy, he traces the roots of oppression, of domination and hierarchy to the fall of women with the rise of the state and patriarchy and centralized administration. In the early 90s, already large groups of women were joining the guerrillas in order to fight against colonialism in Kurdistan. At the beginning, they were doing so with the idea to liberate themselves from oppression, because of course state violence, state terrorism was also taking a huge toll on women and their bodies and their means to self-determine. The more women joined the struggles, the more women, for example, Sakine Cansız in the 1980s, who was one of the founding members of the PKK, we can even say that women in prisons, in Diyarbakir prison, that's where the first autonomous organization of women in Kurdistan happened in this context, with her leadership against the treason that was imposed on the people. It was self-betrayal, it was self-denial and self-assimilation that the people were struggling against. Over time, hundreds of women, thousands of women whose villages were destroyed, women from the universities, women who were becoming aware of their oppression were joining the guerrillas. Over time, the Women's Autonomous Army, the guerrilla, was formed, which is today Yejastar. A women's party was formed, and increasingly more, the move was made towards a women's liberation ideology, which is now today still the most ideological aspect of the Kurdish liberation movement, which informs all spheres of its action. And these were all steps: the creation of an autonomous army, autonomous party, women's own democratic confederal system, which is also being, so that women are not just part of democratic confederalism. There is an autonomously structured democratic confederal system of women in Kurdistan as well. So this has happened, which of course opened the doors to millions of women, such as myself, such as Lave, and all the other people who are here, to have a very different and much broader idea of what it means to be a Kurdish woman. We stopped identifying ourselves any longer just in relation to a man, as somebody's daughter, wife, lover, mother, and so on. We learned to be ourselves. So what happened with this struggle against colonialism that the Kurdistan revolutionaries started was, first of all, a struggle for existence, for bare survival. But today, from Hebun, we can say to Khwabun, which is a concept that genealogy very much engages with. It's self-being, self-creation. It's your own identification of the terms in which you want to live. So no longer is the fight in Kurdistan about simple existence. It's about the establishment of a just and life in dignity. In Rojava, Abdullah Ocalan spent 20 years, from 1979 until he was expelled into exile, after which his ordeal began. He spent 20 years there educating women such as Nafia Assad, who I quoted in the very beginning. He educated the mothers and fathers of people like Ali Mirkan, who was the woman who turned the tide of the war against the Islamic State in Kobani back in 2014. It was people like that who were organized and attending his educations, where he was teaching them about their oppression, about colonialism, and about the need for women to liberate themselves in spite of the men in their own families even. This is not something that we can take for granted in the extremely patriarchal society in Kurdistan. It's not something that should be taken granted anywhere, but especially in these conditions, despite the impositions of even some of his comrades who were saying, no, we cannot focus on women's liberation now. It's something we can do after Kurdistan is liberated. But he said the liberation of women is conditional to the liberation of Kurdistan. This is the main difference between Abdullah Ocalan and all other leaders in the world.
You can make visits, but then you have to act, and you have to use your position in whatever way you can. And I was thinking, when I made my first 2 visits to Ahmed. I must learn to say Ahmed. When I made my first 2 visits was in October 2016, and there were 3 weeks between those 2 visits. The first visit I made was with the European Grassroots Anti-Racist Movement, and we were meeting many women, and we had a visit to the Jinha Feminist Media Collective offices, which were at that time still open, but 3 weeks later had been closed with steel shutters up against them. Because, of course, anything that is speaking about the power of women is a great threat to Mr. Ocalan. But in that 3-week period, there was also put forward by an AKP politician a proposal for a law to allow convicted rapists of underage girls to go free, provided they married the girls. So this is the kind of horrendous, frankly it's a form of violence, isn't it? This is a form of violence against women and girls. So this was coming from the ruling party in Turkey. And, you know, yes, it got defeated, it got chucked out. But the fact that somebody who is in AKP could put forward this as a credible proposal for a law that would be considered by other people, and there was obviously a lot of popular support for it, I think for me demonstrates the violence of the current regime and what we are up against, all of us. When I made my second visit, it was Melanie and I, and in that 3 weeks 3-week space in which I had been the first time and second time, when I went the second time, the 2 co-mayors of Ahmed had been detained. So I'd had dinner with Ferhat Anli in the 3 weeks before, and when I went back the second time, she was in prison. Jinha had been closed down, and the town hall had been completely surrounded by military barricades, barbed wire. And I always liken it to if it was Manchester Town Hall. So I'm a representative for the northwest of England, and I think about ordinary citizens wanting to go to the town hall, maybe to complain about the bin collection, you know, maybe to talk about your child's education, to have a conversation just about services. And it would be like going to a war zone. It would be like having to run the gauntlet of guards wearing masks. You know that people have got tear gas to throw at you, you know, if you look dodgy. And this is the kind of situation under which people are being expected to live. But anyway, Melanie and I were there that time, and there was a women's conference happening on the last day we were there. And it was in a hotel, and we were inside the hotel with all these amazing women who are all activists, no matter what level they're working and what level they're working at within their communities, they're all activists. That hotel was surrounded by military police and guards with, again, weapons. What were we doing inside the room? We were dancing. We were dancing, okay? And this is power. It's a powerful act, isn't it, to dance against these macho guys, you know, with their guns and the women that we were with knew they would be arrested. Okay, it wasn't a matter if we are arrested, it is more a matter of when. Okay, and yet they were still dancing. I have an enormous amount of respect for these women because they are full of life in the face of death. They are extraordinary, and if ever we think, you know, that it is hard for us in the struggle for gender equality and for social justice, I just keep remembering the people that I have met who show so much bravery. I have chosen to support several women. So I supported Leyla Berlik, who was an imprisoned HDP MP. I supported her. I actually went to Silivri prison and stood outside. I wrote her letters. So I was supporting her, and in fact, shortly after I visited the prison, which was at the end of that weekend, she was released from prison. So I just want to say it's important for us to use our positions, use our voices, because we can embarrass the regime. and we need to be embarrassing more the government here.
For essentially the entirety of the 20 years that he has been in the hands of the Turkish state. And so, you know, Dilan and Nadia and everyone else, especially in the previous panel, outlined the way his ideas and his existence actually in some senses has inspired so many millions of people, and particularly women. So I think it's really well fitted and very important that we start this session by saluting all revolutionary martyrs who have given their lives in the past 40 years, for not just the freedom of Kurdistan, not just the freedom not just the freedom of Kurdistan, but the freedom of the entire Middle East, and of course of the liberation of women. I think we should particularly salute the heroic and historic and actually quite unbelievable resistance of Leyla Güven, who has been on hunger strike, on an indefinite hunger strike for 100 days. I simply can't imagine what will that takes to be able to continue that. So it's very important that we keep that on our minds while we have these discussions here today. And also, I think it's important that we salute the heroic Yazidi women and Kurdish women who have fought so relentlessly against the evil that is ISIS, and that defeat will be declared soon.
Starting from the point when I met Mr. Ocalan, I saw him in August 1994 when we talked in Zabadani near Damascus for 18 hours, or 3 consecutive days on all the subjects which we have been talking about this morning. The reason, or I have to say that was 1994. By fall 1993, the PKK was declared by the German authorities a terrorist organization. Due to what happened on the streets in Germany in fall 1993, violence by Kurdish people in Germany, in Belgium, and elsewhere. So, but when he was talking, I thought that he was going to change somewhat, to change the approach. And here again, I have to refer to another experience I had in 1984, 10 years before I met Mr. Ocalan, when the PKK perpetrated the first violent act. I was in Turkey. I was in a hotel together with Turkish colleagues, Turkish professors, Turkish members of parliament. And when I heard about this, I addressed the audience saying that take care, that was in 1984, take care of the Kurdish issue. If you do not, you will have a problem, a challenge in the size of the Palestinian issue. Then all of them stood up, academics, parliamentarians, and saying, Udo Steinbach, what are we talking about? There is no Kurd in Turkey. That was 84, and 10 years later we met. And Mr. Ocalan, to some extent, he had changed his approach. He said we distance ourselves from violence, we distance ourselves from belligerence, that means separatism. We want to address the Kurdish issue in the framework of a democracy in Turkey. And this was very, very, very interesting. And so I think this was the first turning point in his thinking. And now we could of course try to figure out whether there had been progress or not since 1994 until recently. I think yes, it has. There is not a single person anymore who would deny, whether in Turkey or in Iran or in Syria or in Iraq, that is a Kurdish issue. And I think this is achievement. It's not the solution. It is the beginning of a way that the governments, the regimes, that they agreed that there is a Kurdish question that has to be settled. So, and coming back to Turkey, when the Erdogan administration came to power, the Kurdish issue was one of the most issues to be instrumentalized for the purposes of the Turkish government. It was in 2003, 2005, until 2005, negotiations started between the EU and the Turkish government. this was deliberate instrumentalized to come forward, to make progress on the Kurdish issue in order to be accepted democratically by the Europeans to start negotiations about membership in the European. And then it went on. It went on that he approached the Kurdish movement, he approached after 2009, he approached Mr. Ocalan in prison, and many people thought that would be a breakthrough. That now a peace process would have started and some kind of solution according to the ideas of Mr. Ocalan, democratic Kurdish movement within a democratic Turkish political system, that this would happen. It did not. Why did it not? It not why, again, Mr. Erdogan, when he thought it would be useful, instrumentalized the Kurdish issue. And he did it in summer, fall 2015. When the elections, the parliamentarian elections in Turkey in June 2015 had a result different from what he had hoped. The AKP was around, and so he tried that, he realized that the Kurdish issue would be a sort of impediment regarding his intention to become to establish an autocratic system in Turkey. So after June 2015, he instrumentalized the Kurdish issue in order to confront the PKK, in order to show the Turkish public that he is the savior of Turkey. And right 6 months later, in November 2015, when he won the election result was according to what he had hoped. So it turned out that he had successfully instrumentalized the Kurdish issue for his own political purposes. So he needs another Kurdish issue. He needs another Kurdish confrontation. Unfortunately, the Americans are in Rojava. So he couldn't do that, what he would have liked to do since long time, to invade Rojava in order to, again, to make him the savior of Turkey, of Turkish interests against Kurdish. There will be a solution of the Kurdish issue. Mr. Ocalan, he changed his approach for the first time in 1994 when I saw him in Zabadani, and I think he is pragmatic enough. At the same time establishing his policy on sort of ideas or even ideology, but he is pragmatic enough to adapt himself to what is necessary in view of the area of the Middle East at large. Not only Turkey, not only Iraq, but the entire Middle East has to be reorganized. And within this process of reorganization, the Kurdish issue will be very, very significant. And from that point of view, I think discussing the scheme of a democratic confederalism is extremely important, not only for the Kurdish issue, but for the region at large. And this Kurdish issue will be the most significant sign whether this is going to succeed or fail.
How is it that we can have events of such epical historical importance as are happening in Kurdistan today, in northern Syria in particular, going on, and have almost no one in the world know about it? It's really quite extraordinary. For example, right before the Turkish army invaded Afrin, people pointed out that Afrin was perhaps a unique experiment in world history, because not only was it a place a revolution based on the principle of women's rights, it was a place where there were formal political offices. Not just half, but actually about 2/3 of them were held by women. So it's probably there's never been a place in history where you've had something like that happen. Anthropologically, it's really significant. It's important not the people on top who might all be figureheads, but the people in the middle. And this is a place where it really was a women-led society. This is an extraordinary historical importance, and for this to be happening in the middle of the Middle East, a place with
of patriarchy as we know it, you would think would be something that everyone in the world would be interested in knowing. Yet, not only does almost no one in the world know this happened, but when self-avowed anti-feminist patriarchs came in, backed up by the full power of NATO armaments, to wipe this out and reimpose, led by jihadi foot soldiers, who reimposed Sharia on them and drove out a large percent of the population, almost no one knows that happened either. I mean, these are the kind of events you imagine historians will be talking about for hundreds of years to come. Yet, what is the apparatus which makes it possible for people to remain ignorant of these events? Events which really have enormous significance for the very future of humanity, if you think about it. These are issues that could not be more important. What vision of the future ends up dominating the lives of our children and grandchildren? And in that light, I think we need to look around us and these institutions. Here we are in this beautiful room, part of this apparatus of parliamentary power, which is part of an apparatus of military, political, social, and economic power, which actually is what makes this possible. I mean, this very session, there was enormous pressure placed not to allow it to happen, especially in this place. And in order to understand that, there's an ideological conflict going on, a battle between visions of what life could or should be like. And in that war, the Western powers have really weighed in on one side without acknowledging that they have done so. Because there's such a contradiction between the values they espouse, because, ecology, women's rights, democracy, are the principles around which, those guys who like to call themselves the West have framed their claims to superiority over the rest of the world.
Turkey to regressively remodel themselves as an executive presidency. Erdogan has seized all levers of political control and is now free to rule by decree. A fascist state of emergency has normalised, enabling independent voices in politics, the media and academia to be savagely suppressed, as it has been for Kurdish peoples living in Syria, Iraq and Iran. An aggressive and often brutal policy of marginalisation and suppression by the Turkish state now directly threatens the Kurdish-led Rojava revolution, an experiment in freedom, democracy and gender equality that has flourished despite the ongoing Syrian conflict. With Bashar al-Assad's Syrian regime facing collapse in 2012, the Rojava revolution emerged in northeastern Syria as the egalitarian project of self-government began with the liberation of races, religions, ethnic communities and women. What a beacon for the world. The revolutionary model, shaped from the political philosophy of Ocalan, is a hybrid fusion of socialism and direct democracy, a communist system of participatory decision-making supported by an administrative structure of inclusive of each ethnic group. It is truly an inspirational attempt to integrate different ethnic groups and religions in a single participatory egalitarian democracy that respects the individual, the community and the environment. Bearing in mind the traditional peasant norms of the region, remarkably the cornerstone of revolutionary society is the elevated position of women. Child marriage has been outlawed, women are now equal to men in all legal matters, and polygamy has been banned.
We know that Abdullah Ocalan abduction involved an international conspiracy of some foreign intelligence agencies working in cahoots with the Turkish intelligence. It's a travesty of justice that the conspiracy of silence has resulted in his continued incarceration and isolation. I think this was mentioned again and again today. Ocalan's abduction reflects the prevailing attitude among major regional and international powers, which places political interests above the principle of justice and human rights. Abduction, torture, and gross violation of human rights are tolerated to serve various political interests, as you said. We urge the international community to place human rights and justice at the center of international decision-making. It is only through this that we can build a fair and a just world order. Despite the decision of the Grand Chamber Judgment of the Foreign Court of Human Rights in 2005, that Ocalan trial was unfair, and the criticism of the Council of Europe anti-torture watchdog on the isolation of Ocalan, the silence of Europeans and other nations is deafening. Despite being held for almost 2 decades in isolation, itself is a form of torture. In 2013, Ocalan made a call to all the people and sections of society to participate in building not just a new Turkey, but a new Middle East. Ocalan's commitment to a peaceful resolution to the Kurdish issue is not in question. Offer of peace and opportunity to end the conflict was met with stubborn resistance by the Turkish government.
But what is interesting is, and I think this is the change that has come within our times, is previously it was the states that tortured people, that abducted them, that put them in prison. But what we are now finding is that the institutions that are supposed to protect this, against the state's excesses, they are the ones who are actually devising ways and techniques through judicial interpretation processes, through the ways in which cases are handled and procedural aspects of litigation. Through these, the judiciary is increasingly becoming an instrument for doing the things that states did earlier. Yeah? I mean, as our friend Ibrahim from South Africa was saying, he was actually given legal access. Now, in spite of in apartheid Africa. And I think this is an important thing for us because it is one of the challenges that we have to face, whether you are fighting for Ocalan or whether we are fighting for our political prisoners. We had a meeting last week on the Indian political prisoners. So that is one thing. Second point I want to make is if this was only about Turkey and only about the Kurds, we could have said this is an exception. This is what Turkey does, this is what is happening to the Kurds. Unfortunately for us, this is happening across the world. So I can tell you stories about the Indian government. Now in India, what do? They give access to the lawyers to go and visit the prisoners, and then they arrest the lawyers because they say, oh, you've spoken to the prisoner.
The thing, in my reflection about today, is actually that this event took place today in this house on this day. We've already seen, and I think I mentioned earlier today, it ain't easy at the moment to make these sort of events happen, and it really is politically important and politically significant that it has taken place today, as I say, in this house and on this day. It's important that we paid tribute to Abdullah Ocalan and his ideas and the huge contribution that he has made towards peace and in terms of developing thinking. We've heard a lot about Ocalan, his history, his role and his efforts in developing new approaches and his contribution to peace. And I remember you saying it some time ago, Abdullah, that the great thing about people who are committed to and follow the ideas of Ocalan is that they always try to put them into practice, in reality. And we saw that. I had the sad privilege of seeing it in Diyarbakir and some of the Kurdistan areas in Turkey, where the co-chair system was put properly into practice, and now has been brutally smashed, as we've seen so terribly there, and we've seen it being put into reality in Rojava, in that area as well. And that's a fantastic thing to see, not just theory, but the difficulties of trying to translate it into concrete reality. I always say that as a union movement, and some of you have probably heard me say it before, so forgive me if it's repetition for you, but I always say as a trade unionist and the trade union movement, we share so much with Abdullah Ocalan's thoughts and his perspective, and we share so much with the Kurdish political movement. We strive for peace, that's the history of our movement. We strive for democracy, we strive for inclusiveness, we strive for women's rights, we strive for equality, We strive for exactly the same things that the Kurdish political movement has always strived for. And what we've got to get our movement to understand, and I'm optimistic that we're getting there and we're making good progress, is that the struggle of the Kurds, the struggle of the Kurdish political movement in their respective countries that they're in at the moment, the nation states that they're in, is absolutely vital, not just for them, it's vital for all the other people. I think it was Ocalan that said that the Kurds become a force for democracy in any of the countries that they're in, and it's vital because the region is so crucial. It's always been at the crossroads of some of the biggest and most important political developments and upheavals, and anybody that claims and wants to be part of the forces of progress and the forces of tolerance and inclusiveness and democracy must understand that what is going on in that region is critical for the whole of humanity and will define a lot of what goes on in the wider world. I don't think it's exaggerated at all to say that it really is that serious.
Abdullah Ocalan has been in prison for a very long time. His trial was unjust. He was kidnapped from Kenya on his way to South Africa, and the cabinet under Nelson Mandela had agreed that if he came to South Africa, he would be granted asylum. His abduction, his unfair trial and his long imprisonment is really unacceptable, and we wish to appeal to the international community to put pressure on Turkey to release Abdullah Ocalan and all other political prisoners that are languishing in the Turkish prison. And I think that there has to be a lot of pressure and a lot of support, not only for Abdullah Ocalan, but for the freedom and justice of the Kurdish people in Turkey and other parts of the Middle East.
I think that the thoughts of Ocalan is fundamental today because it's an inspiration not only for the Kurdish people but for the people all over the world, and democratic modernity can help the freedom for all the people around the world, and it's crucial for the peace process in Turkey to have the freedom of Ocalan, not only the ends of the isolation, but for a real peace process, Ocalan should be a free man to discuss with the Turkish state.
Okay, I thought it was an absolutely excellent conference and an excellent day. We had a great participation. The room was full for the whole day. We had delegates from quite a few different countries that were here taking part. Most importantly, we made it absolutely clear that we believe Abdullah Ocalan should be freed and allowed to make his contribution to a new society and democracy moving forward. So today was excellent. We talked about his ideas, how they developed and what contribution he had made, and most importantly expressed our solidarity with all of the Kurdish people and all of those in struggle against some of the oppressive regimes and Turkey and further afield in some of the terrible human rights abuses that are going on at the moment. We called for his freedom and an immediate end to the isolation that he's living under.
It's been a great conference, and I think occasions like this are very important because these are moments when we can reflect on our actions, and I think the release of Ocalan is an important call because he is one of our most important political prisoners. But along with Ocalan, I would say we should be calling for release of all political prisoners, because political prisoners are against fundamental ideas about democracy and freedom. Thank you.
This conference was very well done, and I'm so happy to be here. I think it's important that we unite different communities that believe in democracy and believe in the ideas of Mr. Abdullah Ocalan. And it is also very important not to normalize the imprisonment and isolation of the Kurdish leader, and that is why we are also gathered here on the 20th year of his isolation to talk about it, to bring about any solutions, and hopefully we can make this something annual so that we can meet all together and speak about the issues, and especially the women's issues as well, and the women revolution, which is central in the Öcalan ideology.
Human rights lawyer, and I've been in Rojava, I've been in Turkey, and Öcalan must be released. Only when he's released can there be peace. He is the father of the Kurds, he's asking for peace, and his idea of the real democratic society is an idea that can enrich all of us all over the world. Freedom for Öcalan, lift the terror tag from the PKK, and let us have peace.